In the spring of 1888, Eliza Warren stepped off a stagecoach in Wyoming territory with a wedding contract in her pocket, and discovered the rancher waiting for her had never asked for a wife at all. The coach had carried her nearly 1,200 miles from St. Louis to the small settlement of Red Hollow, though the final 30 miles had felt longer than all the rest. The road wound through open grassland, still scarred by winter. Patches of old snow clung to the northern slopes, and a hard wind swept down from the mountains as if spring had arrived without receiving permission. Eliza stood beside one brown traveling case while the driver lowered a narrow wooden trunk from the roof. Sewn into the lining of that trunk were her teaching certificates, $38 in savings, and every object she still owned. In her gloved hand, she held the letter that had brought her west. Daniel Cole, proprietor of Cedar Ridge Ranch, seeks an educated woman of steady disposition for honorable marriage. A comfortable home and lawful partnership are offered. The word partnership had persuaded her. At 29, Eliza had learned to distrust promises of protection. Protection generally meant obedience wearing its Sunday coat. But partnership suggested two people facing the same direction, and after losing her teaching position for publicly accusing the school treasurer of stealing winter coal funds, she had few respectable directions left from which to choose. "You certain somebody's coming for you?" the driver asked. "Eliza Warren?" The voice came from behind her. She turned and saw a tall man standing beside a dark bay gelding. He was perhaps 40, broad through the shoulders, with wind-burned skin and a face made severe by habit rather than cruelty. A pale scar disappeared beneath the collar of his coat. His left hand rested on a walking stick, though the rigid angle of his right leg suggested he needed it more than he wished anyone to notice. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. His gray eyes moved from her face to the trunk, then to the folded contract in her hand. "Yes." Relief loosened something inside her. She offered him the letter. "Then I believe you were expecting me." Daniel did not take it. "I was expecting a schoolteacher." The stagecoach driver paused with one boot on the step. Eliza looked again at the paper, though the words had not changed during the last minute. "Your advertisement requested a wife." "I placed no advertisement for a wife." The wind caught the corner of the letter and snapped it sharply between them. Daniel's expression did not soften, but confusion entered it. "I wrote to the Western Household Exchange in Omaha. I asked them to send an instructor for my niece. I offered wages, a private room, and board." Eliza opened the second page and pointed to the signature. "Daniel Matthew Cole. That is my name. Is that your signature?" He took the contract at last. His eyes moved down the page slowly. The color left his face when he reached the bottom. "It looks like it," he said, "but I never signed this." Behind Eliza, the coach door slammed. "Wait," she called. The driver gathered the reins. "Storm's coming over the pass. I stay here. I don't reach Fort Mercer before dark. I need to return with you. You need another fare and a reservation. Next eastbound coach is due Thursday." The wheels began turning before she could answer. Within moments, the stagecoach had dwindled into a brown shape, beneath a sky rapidly turning the color of iron. Thursday was 4 days away. Daniel stared after it, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have been sent here." It was not the welcome Eliza had imagined during the sleepless nights of her journey. Still, humiliation had visited her often enough that she knew how to receive it without offering refreshments. "No," she replied. "Apparently I should not." She bent to lift her case. Daniel reached for it at the same moment, but pain crossed his face when he put weight on his injured leg. Eliza noticed and lifted the case herself. "I can manage. So can I." "I'm sure you can. That doesn't make the argument useful." For the first time, he looked at her as something other than evidence of a terrible mistake. A low rumble crossed the western sky. Daniel glanced toward the mountains, where gray clouds had swallowed the highest peaks. "Cedar Ridge is 9 miles north," he said. "We have perhaps an hour before that storm reaches the road. And when we arrive, you'll have your own room. The door locks from the inside. Nothing will be expected of you." "And the marriage contract?" He folded the paper once and returned it to her. "It binds neither of us to something neither of us agreed to." The answer was so plain that Eliza almost mistrusted it. Daniel tied her trunk behind the saddle, then adjusted one stirrup so she could ride while he walked beside the horse. When she objected, He informed her that arguing with the weather was permitted, but rarely productive. They had gone less than a mile when Eliza heard a faint metallic chime from inside her case. Her old brass school bell, wrapped carefully between two dresses, had shifted with the horse's movement. She placed a hand over the leather lid until the sound stopped. Daniel glanced up. "What is that?" "The last thing I kept from my classroom." "You brought a school bell across 1,200 miles?" "I brought proof that I was someone before a matrimonial agency decided I ought to become your wife." Daniel absorbed the rebuke without defending himself. Ahead of them, lightning divided the sky above Cedar Ridge. Somewhere beyond those dark hills waited a ranch, a child who needed teaching, and the first mystery of Eliza's new life. Who had rewritten Daniel Cole's request, and why had they been so determined to send him a bride? The storm overtook them 3 miles from Cedar Ridge. Rain struck the prairie in cold, slanting sheets, turning the wagon road dark beneath the horses' hooves. Daniel walked with his head lowered against the wind, one hand on the reins and the other gripping his walking stick. Each uneven step pulled at his injured leg, but when Eliza offered to dismount, he shook his head. "The mare carries you more easily than I do," he said. "That is either practical reasoning or masculine stubbornness." On this ranch, the two are often difficult to separate. It was the closest thing to humor she had heard from him. Cedar Ridge appeared through the rain as a low collection of buildings sheltered beneath a sandstone bluff. The main house was larger than Eliza expected, built of squared pine logs with a covered porch and a stone chimney at each end. A bunkhouse, barn, smokehouse, and several corrals stood behind it. Beyond them, fenced pasture rolled north toward the mountains. Nothing about the place resembled the comfortable residence described by the marriage agency. It was sturdily built and well-maintained, but comfort had not been consulted in its construction. Cedar Ridge looked capable of surviving almost anything, which was not the same as looking alive. Daniel helped Eliza down and carried her trunk, despite the pain he could no longer conceal. When they reached the porch, the front door opened 3 inches. A child's face appeared in the gap. She was thin, with dark braids, solemn gray eyes, and a dusting of freckles across her nose. She looked first at Daniel, then at Eliza, then at the trunk. "This is my niece, Ruth," Daniel said. "Ruth, this is Miss Warren." The child opened the door wider, but offered no greeting. "She doesn't speak to strangers," Daniel explained. Ruth frowned at him. "She also dislikes having that explained." The girl's frown deepened, confirming the diagnosis. Inside, Daniel showed Eliza to a small upstairs bedroom overlooking the southern pasture. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a blue rag rug that had been beaten clean recently. A brass key waited in the lock. "As promised," he said, "the room is yours while you remain here." Eliza tested the key. "Who prepared it?" "Ruth and I." "For a schoolteacher?" "For whoever answered my letter." There was no suggestion that he had prepared it for a bride. No flowers, no shared wardrobe, no private expectation disguised as hospitality. Just a safe room for an employee. Daniel left her to change out of her wet clothes. When she came downstairs, she found him at the kitchen table with 2 papers laid side by side. "This is what I sent to Omaha," he said. The first was a draft written in his blunt, compact hand. It requested an instructor capable of teaching reading, arithmetic, geography, and practical correspondence to one 10-year-old girl. The wages were $12 a month, with room and board included. The second document was Eliza's marriage contract. The wording differed, but the signature beneath both was nearly identical. Eliza lowered herself into the chair. "Someone copied your signature. Or transferred it from the bank draft I sent with the placement fee. They charged me a fee as well." "How much?" $25, nearly half my savings. Daniel's expression hardened. "I paid them $40. A respectable agency had collected money from both parties, falsified an agreement, and sent a woman across the country, knowing she might arrive with no safe way home. Eliza examined the papers more closely. Her years of correcting childish handwriting had made her attentive to small inconsistencies. The signature on the marriage contract was darker than the surrounding text, and the final stroke of Daniel's surname crossed through a printed line it should have passed beneath. "This page was prepared first," she said. Your signature was added afterward, probably traced against a window. Daniel leaned over the table. His coat brushed the back of her chair, and Eliza became aware of his size before she became aware of anything softer. He smelled of rain, leather, and cold air. You can tell that by looking? I can tell because whoever forged it was careless. He straightened. I'll write to the territorial attorney. And I'll write to the postmaster in Omaha. Registered correspondence leaves records. If they have done this to us, they may have done it to others. Daniel studied her with renewed attention. The unwanted bride had become, in the space of a few sentences, the first person to offer him a useful plan. A violent crack of thunder shook the windows. Ruth appeared in the doorway, pale and rigid. Daniel's entire manner changed. He set down the papers and crouched, despite the pain in his leg. It's only thunder, Ruthie. The child's eyes remained fixed on the window. Eliza recognized that look. She had seen it in pupils who were not frightened of the present noise, but of whatever memory had attached itself to that noise. She opened her traveling case and removed the small brass school bell. Its wooden handle was worn smooth from years of use. Eliza rang it once. The clear note cut gently through the storm. Ruth turned. In my classroom, Eliza said, one ring meant everyone should stop and listen. Two meant the danger had passed. She rang it twice. Ruth looked at the bell for a long moment. Then she crossed the kitchen, reached out, and touched its brass rim. Can I ring it? She whispered. Daniel went completely still. Eliza handed it to her. Ruth rang twice, waited for the sound to fade, then rang twice again. The danger has passed, she said. Daniel looked away, but not before Eliza saw the grief that moved across his face. Whatever had injured his leg had left a deeper wound in this house. That evening, the rain washed out the southern bridge. No wagon could reach Red Hollow until the creek fell, and no stagecoach would wait for a passenger stranded 9 miles away. Daniel placed $12 on the kitchen table. 1 month's wages, he said. Teach Ruth until the road opens. If you still want to leave afterward, I'll take you anywhere the railroad can. Eliza glanced at Ruth, who sat near the stove with the brass bell cradled in her lap. I accept the employment, Eliza said, not the marriage. Daniel extended his hand. Those are the only terms I offered. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, neither of them was holding a contract written by someone else. By sunrise, the storm had moved east, leaving the world washed clean and bitterly cold. Water streamed from the eaves, the southern creek had doubled in width, and Cedar Ridge glittered beneath a thin layer of ice. Eliza began Ruth's first lesson at 8 o'clock. There was no schoolroom, so she claimed one end of the dining table. Ruth arrived carrying a slate, 2 worn readers, and the brass bell. She set the bell between them with great seriousness. Am I supposed to ring it? She asked. Only if you intend to begin. Ruth rang once. Daniel, drinking coffee near the stove, looked up at the sound. Eliza saw surprise cross his face before he lowered his cup. She began with arithmetic. Ruth could add and subtract quickly, but multiplication made her retreat into guesswork. Instead of correcting her repeatedly, Eliza drew a rough cattle enclosure on the slate. If one pasture holds 24 cows and your uncle moves them equally into 3 corrals, how many go into each? 8. And if 4 calves refuse to cooperate, then Uncle Daniel says words I'm not allowed to repeat. Daniel coughed into his coffee. Eliza maintained the expression of a teacher who had survived more inventive answers. Mathematically, Ruth, 28 divided by 3 does not divide evenly. Exactly. The cattle have taught you remainders. By 10 o'clock, they had measured the kitchen, calculated the flour required for 6 loaves, and used a ranch map to practice reading distances. Ruth learned rapidly when the lesson concerned things she could see. Eliza suspected the child had never lacked intelligence. She had merely been handed books without being shown how those books belonged to her life. Daniel remained in the room longer than necessary, pretending to mend a leather strap. When Ruth went upstairs for another pencil, he said, "That wasn't how I was taught arithmetic." "How were you taught?" A man struck the desk with a ruler until the answer came to someone. "Did it work?" "I learned to dislike rulers. Then I shall consider another method." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It vanished before becoming a smile, but Eliza counted it as evidence. After the noon meal, she asked Daniel if Ruth could accompany her outside to identify plants and sketch the property boundaries. "You can use the yard and the western pasture," he said, "not the creek. The creek is the clearest boundary on this map. She does not go near it." Ruth became very still. Eliza glanced from the child to Daniel. His hand had tightened around the head of his walking stick. "I would be with her," Eliza said. "No." The single word closed the matter, but Eliza did not appreciate doors being shut in her face, even invisible ones. "If there is a danger, I should understand. Explain it. The bank is unstable after rain. Then that is the reason you should have given first." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "I don't need my decisions corrected at my own table. And I cannot keep a child safe using rules no one will explain." The silence that followed was not comfortable. Ruth looked down at her slate. Daniel was the first to yield, though he did so like a man setting down a loaded weapon. "The creek rises without warning during the spring thaw," he said. "The western pasture is safe, the creek is not." Eliza heard what he had said and what he had not. "Very well. We will remain west of the cottonwood fence." Daniel nodded. It was a small agreement, but Ruth's shoulders relaxed, as though the house itself had exhaled. That afternoon, Eliza and Ruth walked the permitted pasture carrying the slate, a ruler, and a sack containing bread and 2 apples. Eliza taught the girl to estimate distance by counting her strides. Ruth showed Eliza how to distinguish rabbit tracks from those of a young coyote. "You know more about this land than I do," Eliza admitted. Ruth looked suspicious. "But you're the teacher." A teacher who cannot learn is only a person who enjoys hearing herself speak. Ruth considered that. "Uncle Daniel knows everything about cattle." "Does he?" "No, but he thinks before answering, so people assume he does." When they returned, Daniel was in the ranch office with a ledger open before him. A large map of Cedar Ridge covered one wall. Red pencil marks followed the stream running through the northern section of the property. He closed the ledger when Eliza entered. "I need writing paper," she said. "I intend to contact the Omaha postmaster about the forged contract." Daniel opened a drawer and handed her several sheets. Beneath them lay an official envelope bearing the seal of the Vane Land and Water Company. Eliza would not have examined it if Daniel had not covered it so quickly. "Is something wrong with the ranch?" she asked. "No." That answer arrived very rapidly. So did the question. Before she could respond, a rider entered the yard. He wore a charcoal coat too fine for ranch work and rode a gray horse without a trace of mud on its legs. A silver badge on his lapel identified him as a private surveyor. Daniel rose, leaning heavily on the desk. The visitor dismounted, but did not approach the porch. "Mr. Cole," he called. "Silas Vane expects your answer by Friday. If you refuse his purchase offer, our men will begin surveying the North Fork." "There will be no survey on my property." The rider smiled without warmth. "Mr. Vane believes the water belongs to him. He can believe it from the other side of my fence." The man tipped his hat and rode away. Eliza watched Daniel's face. The quiet rancher who had respected her locked door and refused to enforce a fraudulent marriage had disappeared. In his place stood a man prepared to defend 2,400 acres with a damaged leg and no visible plan. "What does Silas Vane want?" she asked. "The creek. And what happens if he gets it?" Daniel looked toward the pasture, where Ruth was ringing the brass bell to announce the end of her first school day. Cedar Ridge dies before summer. Daniel did not explain the dispute immediately. Instead, he told Ruth to finish her copywork and asked Eliza to join him in the ranch office. He opened the official envelope from the Vane Land and Water Company. Inside was a notice declaring that Silas Vane owned the right to divert half the North Fork through a canal planned along Cedar Ridge's eastern boundary. "He is buying dry land east of here," Daniel said. "Without this creek, that land is nearly worthless. With it, he can run 4,000 head of cattle. And without half the creek? My northern pastures fail first. By August, I'd be buying water or selling cattle." The notice referred to a transfer signed by Daniel's older brother, Nathan Cole, conveying his interest in the North Fork to Silas Vane. Daniel placed another paper beside it, a certified copy obtained from the county clerk. The transfer was dated May 17, 1886. "Nathan never sold anything to Vane," Daniel said. "How can you be certain?" Because I was with him that day. His voice changed on the final word. Eliza waited. Daniel looked through the office window toward the swollen creek. Nathan and his wife, Sarah, were bringing Ruth home from Red Hollow. A storm broke over the mountains. Their wagon reached the old crossing just as the water tore out the bridge. Eliza glanced at his damaged leg. I pulled Ruth free, he continued. A beam pinned me beneath the wagon. Nathan went back for Sarah. He did not describe what happened next. He did not need to. The transfer is dated the day they died? Eliza asked. Vane claims Nathan signed it that morning and had it witnessed in Red Hollow. Then your memory contradicts a certified document. Daniel's expression hardened. My memory is correct. I believe you. A court may still prefer paper. He looked at her sharply, but she was already studying the copy. The supposed transfer contained Nathan's signature, the mark of a witness named Abel Finch, and the county clerk's registration stamp. On its face, it appeared lawful. Eliza pulled the ranch ledgers closer. What are you doing? Looking for a piece of paper that remembers the day as clearly as you do. The 1886 ledger was poorly organized. Receipts had been tucked between pages. Entries appeared in 3 different hands, and several weeks had been recorded only as totals. Daniel apologized for none of it. Ranching had required his attention, and books, unlike cattle, rarely broke through fences. Eliza spent 2 hours arranging the records by date. She found a hotel receipt from Red Hollow, a veterinarian's bill, and an invoice for lumber used at the old bridge. None proved where Nathan had been when the transfer was supposedly signed. Then she found a freight receipt dated May 17th. Nathan Cole had purchased 4 replacement wagon wheels in Fort Mercer, 46 miles west of Red Hollow. The receipt showed payment shortly after noon. It helps, Eliza said. But Vane could claim Nathan signed his document that morning and traveled afterward. He couldn't cover 46 miles before noon with a loaded wagon. We know that. A judge will want someone else to establish it. Daniel leaned over the receipt. His shoulder nearly touched hers. You think like an attorney. I think like a teacher who once had to prove a treasurer stole $200 without allowing him to destroy the school's reputation along with his own. You proved it? Yes. And they dismissed you? The treasurer's brother owned the building. Daniel was silent for several seconds. Then St. Louis lost the wrong employee. The words were simple, but they reached a place in Eliza that praise rarely reached. He had not called her brave or unfortunate. He had recognized the value of what she could do. The following morning, Daniel took her to the barn. If you intend to examine the property records in Red Hollow, you need to ride, he said. I rode yesterday. You remained on a horse while it followed me. That is different. He selected a calm chestnut mare named Penny and taught Eliza how to saddle her, check the cinch, hold the reins, and shift her weight on uneven ground. He corrected without mocking and allowed her to repeat each task until she could perform it alone. When Penny startled at a flapping canvas, Eliza nearly lost her seat. Daniel caught the bridle, planting his injured leg hard enough that pain drained the color from his face. You should sit down, she said after dismounting. I'm fine. That phrase appears to be the official motto of Cedar Ridge. To her surprise, Daniel laughed. It was brief and rusty, but real. That evening, Eliza found the brass school bell on the dining table. Daniel had replaced its cracked wooden handle with a smooth piece of walnut and polished the tarnished rim. You repaired it, she said. It was coming loose. You could have told me. You would have said you could manage it yourself. I could have. I know. She ran her thumb over the new handle. He had carved it carefully enough to preserve the shape of the old one. Daniel placed the freight receipt beside the forged transfer. One receipt will not stop Vane. No, Eliza agreed. But forgery is built from many small lies. We need only make them disagree with one another. Outside, the North Fork carried melted snow toward the eastern plains. Somewhere downstream, Silas Vane was preparing to claim it. Inside Cedar Ridge, the teacher he had never ordered began building a case he had not known how to make. 8 days after Eliza arrived, the southern bridge reopened. Daniel had spent 2 mornings repairing it with his ranch foreman, Amos Reed, while Eliza and Ruth continued their lessons. When the final plank was secured, the road to Red Hollow became passable again. It also became Eliza's road home. The next morning, Daniel saddled 3 horses. Ruth rode a small dun pony, Eliza mounted Penny, and Daniel took the dark bay gelding she had seen at the stage stop. He carried his walking stick beneath one stirrup, but moved more easily on horseback than on the ground. They reached Red Hollow shortly before noon. The settlement consisted of 2 intersecting streets, a general store, a bank, a hotel, and a brick courthouse that appeared surprised to find itself surrounded by so much mud. Outside the stage office, Daniel dismounted. "The eastbound coach leaves tomorrow morning," he said. "I spoke to the driver. There is 1 seat available." Eliza looked at him. "You reserved it?" "I asked whether it was available." "That is not the same thing." "No." He reached into his coat and offered her enough money for the fare to Fort Mercer, where she could take the railroad east. "You don't owe me this. You crossed 1,200 miles because someone forged my name. And mine. I can at least return you to the railway." Eliza looked toward Ruth. The child was pretending to examine her pony's reins but had gone very quiet. "My employment agreement was for 1 month," Eliza said. "The road was closed when you accepted. I knew it would reopen." Daniel's hand remained extended. Eliza closed his fingers around the money. "I will complete the month. After that, I will make my own decision." He studied her face as though searching for gratitude, fear, or obligation. She offered none of them. "All right," he said. Ruth's attention returned miraculously to her surroundings. At the courthouse, a gray-haired clerk looked over her spectacles at Eliza, then at Daniel. "So the rumors are true," she said. Daniel Cole finally brought home a bride. Eliza's spine stiffened. Daniel answered before she could. "Miss Warren is Ruth's teacher, and my representative in the Vane matter." The clerk's eyebrows rose. Daniel had not described Eliza as a guest, a stranded woman, or hired help. He had given her standing in the room. "Then I am Ada Lowe," the woman said, extending her hand. "Deputy clerk, keeper of records, and frequent corrector of rumors." Eliza showed her the certified transfer. Mrs. Lowe led them to a shelf of leather-bound registry books. The original entry had been filed on May 23, 1886, 6 days after Nathan and Sarah Cole died. The document was supposedly signed on May 17th, Eliza said. "Who delivered it for registration?" Mrs. Lowe examined a smaller logbook. "Abel Finch. He was also the witness." "Did he work for Silas Vane?" "Finch called himself an independent land agent. That generally means he depended on whichever man paid him." Eliza requested every filing witnessed by Finch during that month. 3 additional transfers appeared, all conveying water or grazing rights to Silas Vane. One belonged to a widow who had moved to Colorado. Another carried the mark of a rancher unable to read. The third was signed by a man Mrs. Lowe believed had already left Wyoming. "A pattern is not proof," Daniel said. "No," Eliza agreed, "but it tells us where proof may be found." She paid for certified copies from her own remaining money. Daniel objected. "This is not part of teaching Ruth. It is arithmetic, penmanship, geography, and moral instruction." Ruth nodded solemnly. "A complete education." Mrs. Lowe concealed a smile. Their next stop was the Red Hollow Hotel. Eliza asked to see the stable ledger from May 1886. The proprietor initially refused, but Daniel reminded him that Nathan Cole had paid for 2 horses and a wagon team on the night before the flood. The entry was still there. Nathan, Sarah, and Ruth had stayed in Red Hollow on May 16th. At 6 the following morning, the stable boy had prepared their team for the west road toward Fort Mercer. A note in the margin recorded a damaged wheel and Nathan's intention to purchase replacements there. If the family had departed west at dawn, Nathan could not also have signed Vane's transfer before a witness in Red Hollow that morning. They now possessed 2 independent records, the hotel ledger placing Nathan on the west road and the freight receipt placing him in Fort Mercer shortly after noon. For the first time, Daniel looked at the forged transfer without helpless anger. "You were right," he said. "Teachers occasionally are." Frequently, according to Ruth. Ruth is receiving an excellent education. They ate lunch at a small cafe before beginning the ride home. Ruth finished her stew and asked permission to visit the general store. Daniel gave her a nickel and watched from the window as she crossed the street. You didn't have to stay, he said. I am aware. She has spoken more this week than she did in the previous 6 months. Eliza placed her spoon beside her bowl. Ruth does not need someone to force her out of silence. She needs to know she will be heard when she chooses to leave it. Daniel looked down at his hands. I kept trying to protect her by removing every danger. Protection is useful. But, eventually, a child must be taught how to cross the creek, not merely ordered to fear it. He accepted the correction without anger. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Neither do I. That makes us equally qualified. This time, his smile remained long enough for her to see it. Outside, a polished black carriage stopped beside the cafe. A lean man, in an expensive brown suit, stepped down and removed his gloves. His pale eyes settled first on Daniel, then on Eliza. Silas Vane entered as though the building belonged to him. Cole, he said pleasantly, and this must be the bride everyone is discussing. Eliza met his gaze. You have already purchased one false document bearing Daniel Cole's signature, she replied. I suggest you avoid inventing another. Vane's smile did not disappear, but something colder replaced the amusement behind it. Daniel slowly rose beside her. In that moment, Silas Vane understood what Daniel had only begun to understand himself. Eliza Warren had not stayed at Cedar Ridge because she needed a husband. She had stayed because she had chosen a side. Silas Vane remained beside the cafe table, smiling as though Eliza's accusation had amused him. You have been in Wyoming barely 2 weeks, Miss Warren, he said. You may discover that documents mean more here than opinions. I taught handwriting for 11 years. That document is not an opinion. It is a forgery. Vane turned to Daniel. Your teacher appears confused about the limits of her employment. Miss Warren decides those limits, Daniel replied. It was a quiet answer, but Vane's smile tightened. He placed a folded offer on the table. $6,000 for all 2,400 acres of Cedar Ridge, including buildings, livestock, and water access. Daniel would have 48 hours to accept. The ranch is worth twice that without the cattle, Daniel said, only if it has water. Vane put on his gloves and left. Daniel did not touch the offer. Eliza folded it and placed it with the copied land records. Why keep it, he asked. Because he has just admitted that the value of your ranch depends upon the water he claims already belongs to him. Daniel considered that, then slipped the paper into his coat. They reached Cedar Ridge near sunset. Before the house came into view, Amos Reed rode out to meet them. We have trouble at the North Fork. The chain securing the northern headgate had been cut. Fresh wagon tracks crossed the meadow, and 20 survey stakes formed a line toward the eastern boundary. 50 yards of shallow trench had already been dug beside the creek. Daniel dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. He drew one stake from the ground and threw it aside. Leave the others, Eliza said. They are on my land. They are evidence on your land. Daniel reached for another. Daniel! It was the first time she had used his given name. That stopped him more effectively than force could have. Eliza examined the discarded stake. An iron band near its base carried the stamped letters VLWW7. The company had marked its own property. Amos saw the men? She asked. 4 of them. They said Vane had legal authority. Did they show it? No. Eliza retrieved the stake Daniel had thrown. Put this exactly where it stood. Then both of you will describe what you saw while I write it down. They measured the trench, counted the stakes, recorded the broken chain, and drew the wheel tracks before darkness erased their edges. Amos signed Eliza's account as a witness. Daniel added his name beneath it. By lantern light, Eliza prepared a formal protest for the county record and a telegram to Jonathan Hale, an attorney in Fort Mercer, whose name Mrs. Lowe had supplied. I'll take these to Red Hollow at first light, she said. No. She looked up from the paper. Daniel's refusal carried fear rather than authority. Vane knows you are helping me. That is why the complaint must be filed immediately. I'll go. You can barely put weight on your leg after today's ride. His jaw tightened. Amos will accompany me, she continued. Penny is steady, and you taught me the road. One riding lesson does not make you ready. No, but 11 years of deciding when fear is useful have made me ready. Daniel looked toward the dark window. Every instinct urged him to keep her inside Cedar Ridge, where he could see the doors and count the dangers. That instinct had already built a prison around Ruth. He would not build another around Eliza. "All right," he said. "You ride with Amos. You return before dark." "I will try." Before dark, Eliza. She heard the concern beneath the command and softened her reply. Before dark. They left at dawn. In Red Hollow, Mrs. Lowe entered the protest into the county record, copied Amos's sworn statement, and sealed the survey stake in the courthouse evidence room. Eliza then sent the telegram to Fort Mercer. Hale's reply arrived 2 hours later. He would petition the district court to stop further construction, but warned that Vane might finish enough of the diversion before an order arrived to alter the creek permanently. Eliza purchased 2 padlocks, extra chain, and red survey ribbon. She spent almost every dollar she had left. When she and Amos returned, the western sky was already purple. Daniel waited at the gate. He took Penny's reins as Eliza dismounted, but his attention remained on her face. "You are late. The telegraph operator was at supper. You said before dark. I also said I would try." For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel released a breath that appeared to have been waiting since morning. "Did you file it?" "Every word." He nodded toward the house. "There's stew on the stove." "You cooked?" Ruth supervised. "The kitchen may recover." Inside, Ruth was asleep at the table beside an open reader. Daniel carried her upstairs while Eliza warmed her meal. When he returned, he sat opposite her without speaking. "I know what it is to have another person write a future for you," Eliza said, looking at the false marriage contract beside Vane's transfer. "I am tired of men believing ink can turn possession into truth." Daniel rested his hands on the table. "No paper gives me a claim on you." "I know. And no work you do here creates a debt." "I know that too." The certainty of her answer unsettled him more deeply than doubt would have. Eliza trusted him because he had earned a small portion of that trust, and Daniel found himself wanting to earn the rest. A shout came from the yard. Amos stood near the northern pasture, pointing toward the creek. Even in the fading light, they could see that the water had fallen several inches. While Eliza was filing the protest, Vane's men had returned upstream. The legal battle had begun, but Silas Vane had no intention of waiting for the law. By morning, the North Fork had fallen another 6 inches. Daniel and Amos rode upstream, while Eliza and Ruth measured the remaining flow at 3 points along Cedar Ridge. Eliza drove marked sticks into the bank, recorded the water depth, and timed floating pieces of bark between 2 fence posts. Ruth watched the bark disappear downstream. "Is this arithmetic?" she asked. "It is arithmetic with wet boots. I like this kind better." Their figures showed that more than half the creek had been redirected. Worse, the water was continuing to fall. Daniel returned near noon with mud on his coat and anger in every line of his body. Vane's men had built a temporary timber dam just beyond Cedar Ridge's northern boundary. The structure forced water into the unfinished eastern canal. It had been constructed quickly from pine beams, packed earth, and loose stone. "It won't hold," Daniel said. Eliza spread the ranch map across the dining table. "How much water is collecting behind it?" "Enough to cover 20 acres already. And the snow is still melting." A warm southern wind had begun that morning. In the mountains, such wind could strip a foot of snow from the slopes in a day. The meltwater would descend into the North Fork and gather behind Vane's untested dam. "If it breaks," Eliza said, "where does the water go?" Daniel traced the natural channel on the map. It curved through the northern pasture, crossed the main cattle corrals, and passed within 100 yards of the barn. Ruth stared at the line. "The old bridge," she whispered. Daniel immediately rolled up the map. "Ruth, go upstairs." "I'm not a baby." "No, but I need to speak with Miss Warren." Ruth looked at Eliza. "Take your reader," Eliza said gently. "We will finish the lesson later." After she left, Daniel gripped the back of a chair. "I'm sending her to the Reed house on the western bluff. You will go with her." "I can help here." "You will go with Ruth." Do not mistake fear for authority. His control broke. "I pulled that child out of this creek once. I will not do it again." The room fell silent. Daniel turned away, but the anger had already revealed what he had spent 2 years concealing. He had not forbidden Ruth from approaching the water because he believed her weak. He had forbidden it because every current still carried the moment he had failed to save her parents. Eliza lowered her voice. You saved her. I saved one person. You were trapped beneath a wagon with a shattered leg, and Nathan went back because I couldn't. You did not create the flood. No, I only remember it. A rider appeared on the road before Eliza could answer. He carried a telegram from Jonathan Hale in Fort Mercer. The district judge had granted a temporary order forbidding Vane from diverting or altering the North Fork until ownership could be determined. A deputy marshal would serve the order the following morning. Daniel read the message twice. By tomorrow, this stops. Eliza looked toward the mountains. The southern wind had strengthened, bending the bare cottonwood branches. Tomorrow may be too late. They rode north together, leaving Ruth with Amos's wife on the western bluff. Daniel did not object when Eliza saddled Penny herself. From Cedar Ridge's boundary, they could see the water trapped behind Vane's dam. It spread between the trees like a new lake. The central beams bowed beneath the pressure, and muddy water spilled over the top. 3 of Vane's laborers were reinforcing the structure. Daniel shouted across the boundary, "There is a court order against this diversion." The foreman, Ezra Pike, removed his hat. "Mr. Vane says no order matters until it's served. That dam will fail." I told him the same. "Then open it gradually." Vane dismissed 2 men for suggesting that. The foreman glanced toward the unstable timbers. He looked less like an enemy than a man who had taken wages from the wrong employer and only recently understood the cost. A deep crack sounded from the center of the dam. The horses shifted nervously. Eliza studied the slope, then opened the ranch map across her saddle. An older line, drawn in fading blue ink, branched south from the creek above the cattle corrals. "What is this?" Daniel looked down. "An irrigation channel my father abandoned 20 years ago. It carried spring water into the southern hay meadow." Could it still carry water? The entrance is blocked by a timber gate and years of earth. If we reopen it before the dam fails, it could divert part of the flood away from the corrals. It would destroy 300 acres of hay. How much hay? Nearly all our winter supply. Without it, Daniel would have to sell most of his cattle before autumn. Cedar Ridge might survive the flood only to fail during winter. Another crack echoed across the water. Eliza folded the map. "We can lose the meadow," she said. "Or we can lose the ranch." Daniel looked at the rising water, then at her. "You still take Ruth to the bluff." "I will take her there, then I am coming back." "Eliza, you hired a teacher because you needed help. You told Vane I decide the limits of my employment. Do not change those limits now because you are frightened." His face tightened. "This is not about employment." The words escaped before he could stop them. Eliza waited, but he could not say the rest. Behind them, the North Fork pressed harder against Vane's dam. Before sunrise, the timbers would break. Daniel had spent 2 years trying to keep the people he loved away from dangerous water. Now survival required him to trust one of them to stand beside him in it. Daniel gave the order before they reached the ranch house. "Move every animal to the western ridge, open the north corrals, take only what can walk." Amos and the ranch hands scattered to their assignments. Eliza rode to the Reed house and explained the plan to Ruth. The girl listened, without interrupting, though fear made her face pale. "You said you would come back," Ruth said. "I am coming back." Ruth picked up the brass school bell and placed it in Eliza's hand. 2 rings when the danger has passed. Eliza closed her fingers around the walnut handle Daniel had carved. 2 rings, she promised. By nightfall, the cattle were moving toward higher ground. Lanterns marked the abandoned irrigation channel across the southern meadow. Years of weeds, packed soil, and fallen branches had filled the old watercourse, but its banks remained visible. Eliza divided the workers into 3 groups. Amos cleared the lower channel. 2 ranch hands dug through the center. Daniel worked at the timber gate connecting it to the North Fork. The wind made shouting useless, so they used the bell. 1 ring meant stop and listen. 3 rapid rings meant leave the channel and seek high ground. 2 would mean the danger had passed. Eliza moved between the groups on Penny, checking depth and direction against the old map. The riding lesson Daniel had given her now seemed less like frontier instruction and more like preparation for a night neither of them had imagined. Near midnight, Warm rain began falling. The old gate would not move. Its iron hinges had rusted together, and earth covered the lower half. Daniel fastened a rope around the crossbeam, while Amos brought 2 draft horses into position. They pulled. The rope tightened. The horses strained. The timber groaned but remained fixed. "If we pull harder, the beam will break," Amos said. Daniel stepped into the muddy channel with an axe. Eliza rode toward him. "What are you doing?" "The lower brace is holding it. You cannot reach it safely. I built this gate with my father. I know where the brace sits." Water already seeped around his boots. Each step on the uneven ground forced his damaged legs sideways. Eliza dismounted. "Then show me where to attach the second rope." He looked at her, rain running from the brim of his hat. "You stay on the bank. You need someone controlling the horses, and I can do that." This time, Daniel did not argue. He tied one end of the second rope around his waist and handed the other to Eliza. It was not a leash and not a rescue line. It was an agreement. She would hold him steady while he did the work only he knew how to do. Daniel waded to the gate and drove the axe beneath the water. Once, twice, again, a distant roar rose from the north. Ezra Pike appeared along the boundary, waving his lantern in wide circles. "The dam is breaking!" Eliza rang the bell 3 times. The men abandoned the channel and climbed the banks. Amos released the draft horses. Eliza wrapped Daniel's rope around her saddle horn and mounted Penny. "Daniel, one more cut." The axe struck beneath the water. The buried brace split. "Pull!" Eliza drove Penny forward while Amos led the draft team. The ropes snapped tight. The old timber gate tore free with a sound like a tree breaking in winter. Water rushed into the abandoned channel. Daniel lost his footing. The current carried him against the bank, but the rope around his waist held. Eliza turned Penny uphill and kept the line tight until Amos reached down and dragged Daniel from the water. Then Vane's dam failed. The sound rolled across Cedar Ridge like thunder beneath the earth. A wall of black water burst through the trees, carrying pine beams, rocks, and pieces of the unfinished diversion canal. The main current struck the open channel. For one terrible moment, it seemed the narrow cut could not contain it. Water spilled over both banks and spread across the southern meadow. Fence posts vanished. Stacked hay lifted and turned in the current. 300 acres prepared for the summer crop disappeared beneath mud and foam. But the channel held. Most of the flood turned south, away from the corrals, barn, and ranch house. The cattle remained safe on the western ridge. The rebuilt bridge shook but did not break. Cedar Ridge had sacrificed its best meadow, but it was still standing. Daniel lay on the bank, breathing hard. Eliza knelt beside him. "Your leg?" "Still attached." That was not the question. "It rarely is with you." Even exhausted and covered in mud, he almost smiled. His hand closed around her wrist, not to hold her back, only to be certain she was there. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would. I was afraid you would." Eliza understood that he was no longer speaking about the Reed house or the flood. Before she could answer, Amos called from downstream. A man had been caught against the remains of the eastern fence. It was Ezra Pike. Daniel tried to stand. His leg failed beneath him. "You stay here," Eliza said. He began to object, then stopped. Trust, like any other useful skill, improved only when practiced. Eliza and Amos reached Ezra with a rope. They pulled him from the shallows and carried him to higher ground. His shoulder was injured, but he was conscious. "Vane knew," Ezra said through chattering teeth. "I warned him the dam wouldn't hold. He ordered us to add more timber and keep the water back until his canal was finished." "Will you say that to the marshal?" Eliza asked. Ezra looked at the wreckage scattered across Cedar Ridge. Several beams carried the company's iron stamp. "Yes." The deputy marshal arrived shortly after dawn with the court order. He found the illegal canal, the cut chain, the registered protest, Vane's marked timbers, and 4 laborers willing to confirm that construction had continued after repeated warnings. Silas Vane had tried to let forged paper speak for him. By sunrise, the land itself had answered. Eliza returned to the bank where Daniel waited. The rain had stopped. Pale light spread across the flooded meadow, revealing the full cost of their decision. "Most of the winter hay is gone," Daniel said. "We will find another way." He looked at her. You say we very easily now. Eliza glanced down at the bell in her hand. Its brass was scratched and muddy, but Daniel's walnut handle remained firm. Some words become true through use. From the western bluff, Ruth stood watching beside Mrs. Reed. Eliza raised the bell and rang it twice. The clear notes crossed the wet fields. The danger had passed. Daniel spent 3 days confined to the house after the flood. His injured leg had not broken again, though the doctor warned that another night in freezing water might accomplish what the first accident had failed to do. Daniel received this advice with the respectful expression of a man who intended to ignore it later. Eliza placed his walking stick beyond reach. "That is theft," he said. "It is temporary confiscation." "On whose authority?" "The person who can reach it first." While the southern meadow drained, Jonathan Hale arrived from Fort Mercer. The attorney examined every document Eliza had assembled: Nathan's freight receipt, the hotel stable ledger, the suspicious transfers witnessed by Abel Finch, Amos's sworn statement, Vane's purchase offer, the marked survey stake, and Ezra Pike's account of the dam. Hale had also followed the trail Eliza uncovered at the county office. The Colorado widow named in one transfer swore that she had never sold her water rights. The rancher who supposedly placed his mark on another document had been working in Nebraska on the date written beside it. Faced with 3 fraud complaints, Abel Finch had been located in Fort Mercer and questioned by the deputy marshal. Finch confessed. Silas Vane had paid him to prepare false transfers, copy signatures from unrelated business papers, and register the documents together after Nathan's death. Vane had believed a dead man, an absent widow, and an illiterate rancher would make convenient sellers because none was likely to challenge the written record. He had not planned for a schoolteacher who treated every lie like an incorrect sum. The hearing took place in Red Hollow, 1 week after the flood. Mrs. Lowe testified about the registration log. The hotel proprietor produced the stable ledger. Ezra described Vane's order to continue holding water after the dam had been declared unsafe. Amos testified about the cut chain and unauthorized survey. Eliza spoke last. She explained how the dates, travel distances, receipts, and signatures contradicted one another. She did not embellish. The facts required no dramatic assistance. Vane's attorney objected twice to her qualifications. The judge overruled him twice. By late afternoon, the forged transfer had been declared void. Cedar Ridge's right to the North Fork was confirmed, and Vane's remaining construction equipment was seized as security for the damage caused to the ranch. The deputy marshal arrested Silas Vane on charges of fraud, property destruction, and violating the court's order. Further proceedings would take months, but his canal would never carry Cedar Ridge water. Outside the courthouse, Daniel offered Eliza his arm for the steps. She looked at his walking stick. "Are you supporting me, or am I supporting you?" "Yes." They descended together. A second matter awaited them at the post office. The Omaha postmaster had answered Eliza's inquiry about the false marriage contract. The Western Household Exchange had been operated by a man named Milo Brand, who collected fees for employment placements and marriage arrangements. Marriage contracts earned him larger commissions, so he had altered Daniel's request, copied the signature from Daniel's payment draft, and advertised Cedar Ridge as the home of a wealthy rancher seeking a wife. Brand had abandoned the office shortly after sending Eliza west. Postal authorities were searching for him. Daniel read the letter beneath the post office awning. "I am sorry. You did not write the advertisement. My name was on it. So was mine." He looked at her. "Do you regret answering it?" Eliza folded the letter carefully. "Ask me after my contract ends." Her 30 days at Cedar Ridge ended the following Saturday. That evening, Daniel found her on the porch watching new grass emerge through the mud of the ruined meadow. The flood had destroyed the hay, but neighboring ranchers had offered seed, labor, and enough winter feed to prevent Daniel from selling the herd. He sat beside her. "Your month is finished." I counted. "I can offer you permanent employment, higher wages, $20 a month. You should not pay a teacher more because she survived a flood. I would pay you more because Ruth has learned in 1 month what I failed to teach her in 2 years." Eliza studied him. "Is that why you want me to stay?" "No." "Then do not begin with wages." Daniel looked toward the creek. Speaking plainly frightened him more than confronting Vane. largely because Vane had never possessed the power to break his heart. I don't know how to ask this without making it sound like another contract. Do not ask for a wife. His gaze returned to her. Ask for what you actually want. He rested both hands on the walking stick. I want you at Cedar Ridge when there is no case to solve. I want you here when Ruth no longer needs lessons and the ledgers are in order. I want your questions, even when I dislike them. I want to know that when I come through the door, you will be somewhere inside this house because you chose to be. Eliza's eyes brightened, but she did not look away. And if I am no longer useful? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. You would still be Eliza. It was the only answer she had ever needed. She placed her hand over his. I love you, she said. Daniel closed his eyes for one brief moment. The words did not erase the flood, Nathan, Sarah, or the years of grief. They did something more difficult. They allowed those losses to remain true, without making them the end of every truth that followed. I love you too. He turned his hand beneath hers and held it. I am not asking you to marry me tonight, he said. That is unexpectedly sensible. I would like the next time I ask you for anything to contain no forged signatures, no misunderstanding, and preferably no immediate threat of flood. A demanding standard. I have been advised to improve my judgment. They sat together until the light faded from the meadow. Eliza had arrived believing a contract had assigned her a husband. Daniel had received her believing a stranger's fraud had created a burden. Neither paper had been true, but the choice they made after every illusion was gone belonged entirely to them. Cedar Ridge did not recover in a single season. The southern meadow remained buried beneath mud through most of the summer. Daniel sold 30 cattle to reduce the winter feed requirement, and neighboring ranchers supplied enough hay to protect the remaining herd. He accepted their help on the condition that he repay every wagon load with labor. No one argued. Daniel Cole could make gratitude sound remarkably similar to a business arrangement. The compensation recovered from Vane's seized equipment paid for a stone-lined spillway where the abandoned irrigation channel had stood. If the North Fork rose again, the water could be released gradually across the lower pasture without threatening the ranch buildings. Daniel supervised the construction, but the design belonged largely to Eliza. She calculated the necessary slope from the flood measurements and insisted upon 3 separate control gates. You are a schoolteacher, Daniel reminded her. A schoolteacher who prefers not to repeat a lesson involving midnight floodwater. He built all 3 gates. Silas Vane was convicted of fraud and unlawful property damage. The false transfers connected to Abel Finch were canceled, and the affected landowners recovered their water and grazing rights. Vane's cattle company collapsed soon afterward, not from bad luck, but from the discovery that much of what it claimed to own had belonged to other people. Milo Brand, the matrimonial agent responsible for sending Eliza west, was eventually arrested in Kansas. The money he had taken was never fully recovered, but the forged marriage contract was formally declared worthless. Eliza kept it. She folded it into the Cedar Ridge records beside the canceled water transfer. Why preserve either one? Daniel asked. Because false papers can still record a true warning. Which is? Never allow a stranger with excellent penmanship to plan your life. By July, Eliza had converted one side of the unused bunkhouse into a schoolroom. 5 children from neighboring ranches joined Ruth at the long tables Daniel built. Lessons included reading, geography, ranch arithmetic, correspondence, and the occasional examination of animal tracks when the weather refused to remain indoors. The brass bell stood on Eliza's desk. Its surface still carried scratches from the night of the flood. She polished it, but never removed them. Some marks deserved to remain because they proved an object had been useful when beauty alone would not have been enough. Ruth changed gradually. Thunder still frightened her, but it no longer stole her voice. One August morning, she asked Daniel to walk with her to the rebuilt bridge. They stopped at the edge of the North Fork. I want to cross, she said. Daniel's hand tightened around his walking stick. Eliza waited several yards behind them. This choice belonged to Ruth, and the courage required belonged partly to Daniel. He examined the bridge, checked the current, and then stepped aside. I'll be here, he said. Ruth crossed alone. On the opposite bank, she turned and waved. Daniel lowered his head for a moment. He had finally understood that protecting someone did not always mean preventing the journey. Sometimes it meant building a sound bridge and trusting the person to use it. Eliza slipped her hand into his. He held it without looking away from Ruth. In September, Daniel took Eliza to the northern pasture. Autumn had begun turning the grass gold, and the North Fork moved quietly within its banks. He carried no contract. "Eliza Warren," he said, "you came here because another man decided you should become my wife. A poor beginning. I would like to correct it." She waited. "I am not asking for a teacher, a bookkeeper, or someone to save Cedar Ridge whenever I make an unreasonable decision. That last position could require permanent employment. I am asking whether you will build a life with me, as my wife, my equal, and the person most likely to tell me when I am wrong. Will I be permitted to tell you when you are right? I suppose we can include that." She smiled. "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you." He had brought a simple gold ring from Fort Mercer. Before placing it on her finger, he asked once more whether she was certain. Eliza answered by kissing him. They married at Cedar Ridge in October 1888. Mrs. Lowe served as a witness. Jonathan Hale traveled from Fort Mercer. Amos and his wife stood beside Ruth, and every ranching family that had supplied hay arrived carrying enough food for twice the number of guests. The ceremony took place in the schoolroom. When the vows were finished, Ruth rang the brass bell twice. The danger had passed, and a new life had begun. But the wedding was not the end of their story. Eliza continued teaching after becoming Eliza Cole. Daniel never asked her to abandon the work that had made her herself before she knew him. Together, they expanded the school until children traveled from 12 miles away to attend during the warmer months. Cedar Ridge recovered. The flooded meadow produced hay again in the third summer, and the new spillway protected the ranch through every heavy spring that followed. Daniel taught Eliza to judge cattle, mend harness, and read mountain weather. She taught him accounting, patient argument, and the useful difference between silence and avoidance. Ruth grew into a confident young woman with her mother's courage, her father's love of land, and her uncle's habit of considering every answer before speaking. She eventually trained as a teacher and returned to Cedar Ridge to work beside Eliza. Years later, the school bell was mounted beside the front door of a larger schoolhouse overlooking the ranch. Its brass had darkened, and the walnut handle Daniel carved was smooth from thousands of hands. Every morning, its sound crossed the same Wyoming fields where Eliza had once arrived, believing her future had already been written. It had not been. A fraudulent contract brought her to Cedar Ridge, but no paper made her remain there. She stayed because Daniel respected the choice when she could have left. He loved her ability without reducing her to usefulness. She loved the wounded man without treating him as something broken that only she could repair. Together, they built a home in which neither person was owned, rescued, or replaced. They were simply chosen, freely, repeatedly, and for life.